You're listening to Beyond the Sermon, the podcast of First Methodist Church in Collingswood, New Jersey. On our podcast, the goal is not just to share our sermons, but to go beyond the sermon and talk about what we're learning and what God is doing in us and in our community. The conversation you're about to join was inspired by our Lent sermon series for 2024. I am, letting Jesus be who he says he is. In this series, we're looking at Jesus' I am statements in the Gospel of John as we seek to gain a fuller picture of who God is. You can find more information about our church at fumccollingswood.org. Thanks for joining us for this conversation. Well, Jeremy, belated Happy St. Patrick's Day to you.
Thank you.
It's something I learned just yesterday is that there's a push for those of us who are Protestant, which means, not Roman Catholic or Greek Orthodox, for those of us who are Protestant to wear orange on St. Patrick's Day in solidarity with those Irish people who live in Northern Ireland. And so if you look at the flag of Ireland, it's green and white and orange, right? And that was supposed to represent the coming together of those two factions. And that's happened to greater and lesser extents at different points in history. So traditionally, if you were Irish Catholic, you'd wear green on St. Patrick's Day. If you were Irish Protestant, you'd wear orange. And it goes back, I guess, to when William of Orange sided with the Protestants in Northern Ireland.
Huh.
I didn't know it was a thing. I wore green yesterday, even though I've been a Protestant my entire life.
I got away by having some green already on the bracelet that Bethany Alexander made me, which saved me from getting pinched by Chloe. That's good. Yeah, a little protection bracelet. But yesterday, this weekend, a lot's happened this weekend. We're both pretty exhausted.
Yes, that's
weekend.
true.
A lot of good things.
A lot of good things. We had the Easter egg hunt here. Had
Easter egg hunt.
Pile of kids and families from our community come out, which is good to see.
And then I posted a picture of Theo in the comments on our Facebook page, and I didn't realize that I was logged in as the church. I was trying to do it as a personal thank you, and then it looked like the church was thanking the church for the Easter egg hunt.
What else was going on this weekend?
30-hour famine with our youth, fasted for 30 hours and raised, it keeps climbing, but last time I checked, over $9,300 for World Vision to help provide food, medical care, and other resources for kids in third and second world countries. Out of over 200 youth groups, our youth group was the third highest fundraising group, and we raised 8% of total funds that have been fundraised so far with the 30-hour famine, which is pretty amazing. Our kids did a really, really great job, and we spent a lot of time doing games and activities and watching videos and just kind of like learning about what other kids' lives are like that don't have all the blessings that we take for granted.
Yeah. One of my boys participated for the first time this year, and he was super excited to hit the $480 mark, which meant that, the funds he raised would support one kid for an entire year.
Yeah,
so
it went really well. And not only were we able to help with the egg hunt, but then later in the afternoon, we were able to help set up for the food pantry.
Yeah, they had their distribution for Easter and for March, and they were able to support 35 families this month.
No, it was really amazing. And to see like the ins and outs and like how things go from being donated all the way through to being handed out. And so I think having that opportunity also gave the kids kind of like perspective of like, oh, I could do this more regularly, and it's right here at our church. And so I'm hoping to see more regular involvement from the youth. Some of them even, dare I say, had fun helping.
What?
I know. It was really a really great opportunity. And but no, so that was a few things we had going on this weekend. And then we had a mission moment that was shared by Hannah Plotz.
Yeah, it was good to hear her reflect a little bit on getting to see some of the Sponsor Children's program stuff when she was down in Mexico last summer, and to see her excitement to be able to go back down and partner with that program again this summer. That's neat.
Yeah, she'll be going down. We have a few people, not from this church. Hannah's the only one from this church that's going down with the Sponsor Children's Project in August to help distribute school supplies, but also to translate and organize letters that the kids write for their individual sponsor and organize the photos of them with their school supplies. So when we come back, we can get that to people that sponsor their kids, which is a really, really great.
It's always amazing to me to hear the statistics that have jumped in La Pamilla because of the impact of that program.
Yeah, and that was even more exciting for me this weekend because, like, I'd known the statistics for, like, maybe the past year and a half or so. We found out about the census being available online for us to see. But when I was preparing this weekend, I'd always been like, we look at this jump in literacy and also in the average grade that's completed by students. I was like, in the back of my mind, the pessimist in me is like, okay, but what if, like, just in general in Mexico, like, they're all kind of going up at this rate?
Yeah.
Can we really, like, prove that the Sponsored Children's Project is really making that difference, or in general the country's just going in that direction? And so to be able to compare it to the national average and to see, like, the literacy rate increase eight times more than the national average.
Right. Yeah.
And the average grade completed is double
more than double. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, that was really, really encouraging to me and the rest of the people, now that we're an official nonprofit, to, like, we need to have an official board and official, like, names and titles and officials, and Hannah's a part of that. And so I'm very excited to, just see God continue to use this project in ways, and we're just constantly working on new ways to help the community. Hannah touched on the library, and to some people will be like, well, why do they need another library? I think the closest library would be 35 minutes away, and I don't know if they get access to it. Like we think, library, like, if you live in the town, you automatically get unlimited free access to the library. But also there's just, like, and then we think, well, if you don't have a library, like, we Amazon books, we have, like, whatever we have in our house, and we buy for our kids, or people bought for our kids, and that just doesn't.
Or the schools have, good libraries or whatever.
Libraries in the schools they go to, and that's just not the case in the village. And so kids' books, non-existent. I don't think I've seen one in anyone's house. My mom used to carry a collection in her house, and kids would always love to come and read them. And then once she passed away, then, like, no one is using these books. And when I talk to people in the church about, like, if you're interested in learning more about this, or you want something to help, like, give you accountability or direction in your own personal time in the Word, like, what devotionals are there? And they're like, there are no devotionals.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh. And I was like, yeah, but we have the internet, right? They have internet access. But to find Spanish Christian resources that are free,
that you can trust who the authors are, and, like, all that kind of stuff,
aren't just put up by Joe Schmo. And so it's a niche and harder thing to find. So the closest bookstore, even if they had money, would be an hour and a half away, I believe, in Tezutlan. And if you want a Christian bookstore, probably Pueblo, which is 3.5 hours away, if not Mexico City, which is over 5.5 hours away. And to give more context with, like, that, of, like, I would say 90 to 95% of the village has never made it as far as Pueblo before. So it's not like next time, we go on a trip or vacation to Pueblo, then we can, like, grab, like, it just doesn't happen. And so we're trying to find a way to create a space where children can come and read, adults that are interested can come and read, because there's just such a desire. And to have teenagers come up to me and be like, is there any way you can find a copy of this book I heard about in school? It was specifically the Diary of Anne Frank. Is there any way you could find a copy of that? Like, I've never had a kid in the youth group be like, I really want to read this book. Can you help me get this book? Yeah. Because either A, none of our kids want to read anything that's more than necessary in school, or B, they would just ask
They
their
know how to
parents,
get
and their
it.
parents
Yeah.
would be able to quickly provide that for them. And so, yeah, that's something that we're working on in the next couple of years to make
No,
possible.
one thing I was thinking about as Hannah was sharing yesterday, she kept saying the village of La Pamilla, the village of La Pamilla. When we think of a village, or at least when I think of a village, I think of, a small collection of smaller homes, population wise, or what does La Pamilla look like?
Yeah. So, and I'll add that the Sponsored Children's Project, if people remember when we talked about our mission trip last year about how a good chunk of the funds is going to help one of their mission churches in a nearby village. So we help in those towns as well, which surround La Palmilla, and they're even smaller. La Palmilla has blown up. Between 2010 and 2020, the population has more than doubled to over, I believe we're around 5,000 people now.
Okay.
And so it's just become a very, very popular hub. And if you ask people in the community or in I would say in the church that have been around long enough and been involved enough to see the changes, they credit a lot of that to the work of mission teams coming to help build the church and give that example of generosity and providing jobs for people to work at the church for construction and stuff like that, but then also the Sponsored Children's Project to provide better education, more education, having more people in the area educated and desire higher education, and having the money because all the school supplies are bought from local businesses in the village.
Yeah.
So it stirs the local economy, right? And so they were. I just found out that when we were there with the mission team, how they were sharing about like La Palmilla is becoming more desirable to outsiders than ever before, where the town was more stagnant. And so, yeah, it's been nice to see. So we're looking at like 5,000. I would say maybe a little bigger than Collingswood, if not about the size of Collingswood. Collingswood is like 2 square miles, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd say it's around there.
Yeah, because it just got me thinking when she was saying village, and I get, different
And you being from
places.
Going to Uganda, you're
Right. Like, yeah.
Different. Yeah.
But, when we pulled into La Palmilla, I was like, oh, it was more like a town. And so just wanted to help people
Well, once you get
bridge
to
that
cement
gap a little
roads,
bit.
then people start thinking town all of a sudden and streetlights, which
Sure.
is true.
I
which
mean,
is true. And so maybe
yeah.
this is the becoming a town from all the
On its
all the
way.
help that's been.
Yeah. And it felt like when we went out to see the mission churches and stuff, then we were going to the village.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Yeah. No, so it's been a blessing and to see and to have this congregation even just be aware of it in general. It's not even like looking for the financial support, but the prayer support, because for the longest time I didn't ever bring it up ever.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want it to be something where it was like the pastor is pushing their own, like, I'm a part of this, so that means you need to be a part of this and help with these things. But Hannah on her own has desired to continue working with the Sponsored Children's Project and be fairly heavily involved, not just on the ground, but through the year. And so with her being a member of the congregation far before I was here, and one that if, whatever time that I'm not here, that she will hopefully still be here and continue, that it's more of that, her being the bridge instead of me being the bridge. Because last year we had about 230 students that we got sponsored, and we had a large donor cover 30 of those kids at the very, very last minute. But there were 30 kids that didn't have sponsors by the end of the year, but then were covered for one time, and that person isn't planning to regularly support all 30 of those kids. So we anticipate in the next few weeks finding out all the kids that fully qualify, and seeing who still needs sponsors.
But you anticipate that there will be kids who
there will probably
need sponsors.
Be at least a couple dozen, and you never know what circumstances with other sponsors that they have to discontinue even after years of supporting a kid. And so, for between, I think it's like $60 and $125, depending on the grade, that covers the kid for everything they need for the entire school year. So it's just once once a year, and then that covers for everything. And being able to, as I was sharing with someone from the congregation after the service about how like the unique thing about being a sponsor from FUMC Collingswood is that you have the opportunity, if we take another mission team down there in the next 2-3 years, who knows, however God steers things, but you have the opportunity to meet your sponsored kid in person and meet their family and connect with them on an even more personal level than the project normally provides. And depending on when that mission trip lines up, because of how the kids and the families view the sponsors, they refer to you not as sponsors, but as godparents. That's the word that's used. Padrinos or madrinas. So they would, if we were there around graduation season, would want you to walk them down graduation, down the aisle. And so there's just these great personal connections that you can build with the kids that you support. And so, but prayers for this season for all the kids and all the work, and for Hannah as she prepares and works on her Spanish some more, and all of those things to go back down in August during the hottest month of the year. Because believe it or not, Scott, the July is actually a little dip down.
No. So I was asking Meg yesterday afternoon a little bit about, if she, in listening to the sermons, if there were any kind of things that stood out to her, questions she had, or things that, maybe I alluded to that didn't quite answer or something like that. And she said no. She's like, I didn't really, your sermon did a good job coming around and kind of tying up the loose ends. But it got me thinking that we didn't really get much into the second half of the scripture passage that was read.
So take us there. Where are we at?
So we focused in specifically, a little context from verses 1 through 5. But then when Jesus says in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. But then we didn't really get into, I mentioned that, Philip and Jesus kind of had this little exchange where Philip said, if you just show us the Father,
that'll be enough.
That'll be enough for us. And it's amazing to me that here at the end of 3 years of following Jesus, all the miracles they've seen, all the teachings they've heard. I mean, I can't imagine the conversations that were had between Jesus and these disciples that weren't recorded in any of the Gospels. And you've got to imagine, Jesus has been pretty clear in what we see, about praying our Father and talking about the Father and that kind of stuff. And Philip, he says, well, just show us the Father, and that'll be enough. Somehow just all this time and still missing it. Still not getting it. And I get it. The Trinitarian being of God isn't an easy thing to comprehend.
Yeah.
But Jesus' answer is don't you know me? Even after I've been among you for such a long time, that's 14:9. He said, anyone who's seen me has seen the Father.
Well, I'm sure, he's obviously been doing things of God, and that's why Philip follows, right? No, never questioning whether it was coming from Abba the Father, right? But maybe it was a harder connection of, I know you're doing things of God, and I believe you to be the Messiah, but I don't think in the prophecies in the Old Testament, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it ever equates the Messiah with being one with the Father.
Sure. No, 100%, you're right.
So making that leap, I think, might be the harder mental one, even after seeing everything. Obviously, God is working through you. God has provided all these things. You are the Messiah provided by God, and that's why you're able to do all of those things. But that doesn't mean that you are, you're one with the Father.
Yeah.
I think that's the mental jump that's being made here, and that
sure, because even when Peter says, he makes that great confession, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. I don't think he thought about it like we think about it now with the Trinity. Like, to be the Son of God, the emperors claimed to be a son of the gods. You know, it didn't mean that you were in fact God incarnate. But it's still just so fascinating to me. Like, and it rings so true to the experience I've seen so many people have. Like, oh, if I could just see this happen, then, you know, I could really believe what Jesus says. If I could just see this miracle take place, if I could just see this, then, you know, all the doubts that I have would melt away.
In the past few years, when I've heard that, I think it is a load of crap. That's the phrase I'm going to use. And it's not that the person thinks they're lying or thinks they're, you know, being disingenuous with it, but the few people, and it's not anyone from this congregation that I've had that comment made to me, at least since I've been here. So it's in no way a personal attack, and it's not even an attack on the people that have said it to me. But when I get deeper into conversation with them about the areas in which they want to see God or would like to see God, it seems like they're using as an excuse of, I don't need to be fully in and fully give myself to God until he does A, B, C. I'm almost there. But like, sending his son to die for me wasn't quite enough. I need to see A, B, C.
Sure.
And I think when we talk about like God not just seeing the man from the outside, but knowing his heart, I think that if that person in their heart was genuine, then God would have revealed himself to them in a way that would have led them to follow and love him with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. But there's times where I was like, I know if he did that, you'd still find another excuse.
Yeah.
Like, this is the one for now, but there's something else coming along. And it's not that I don't make excuses.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a little bit of what Jesus is expressing here. Like, really, Philip? That's the card you're going to play here? Like, all that you've seen, all that you've experienced, all the ways I've pointed to the Father, and you're going to say, well, I just need to see the Father? Like, come on, man. Even if you don't take my words, he says, you know, believe me when I say that I'm in the Father, or at least believe in the evidence of the works that you've seen. Like, clearly, all that's happened, all that we've been through together, points to something beyond this earthly world.
Yeah. And that's where, like, as we see, I sounded like fairly harsh, I think, like a minute ago. I find it easier to give grace to believers and non-believers now, because if Philip, and then when we think of like Peter denying Jesus after he's arrested, that like these guys that walked and talked with him for so long still are falling short in these areas of believing that he was enough, or like not wanting to be associated with him when it wasn't like, I don't know, like good enough or work, like all of these things that when we are separated from physical Jesus and not being able to like reach out and touch him, it can be harder to be faithful. It can be harder to want to publicly associate with him when it goes against the grain of the culture and people around us and all of those things. So like, it's not easy at all.
No.
But I think we can learn from the mistakes of the apostles, and because they're still human, right? They weren't perfect, just because they got saint thrown in front of their names.
Well, and that's part of what I appreciate about the Gospels so much is that they don't sugarcoat that stuff. They don't cut it out because it made, you know, these early leaders of the church look bad.
Yeah.
You know, and it gives me so much more hope for the times when I've struggled with things or I've missed it and then somehow later, you know, come to a realization or of what is reality, and look back and be like, oh, I really missed it there. And that's okay. And God, while he wants us to continue to grow and learn and deepen that relationship with him, there's still grace there for those moments when we miss it.
Amen. Thanks be to God. Like that was a part of when I studied a whole bunch in apologetics about the validity of the Gospels, where specifically with Peter, almost pushes so much more of if they were making these things up, they would have painted him, specifically him, in a better light, because he was told that he was going to be the rock, he was going to be the foundation of the church, right? Yeah. And we see that right in all of the letters and literature we have after the Gospels. Just because it's organized first doesn't mean that it was written first, right?
Right.
So John is one of the last things we have written. And so when they're writing John, after they see all the things that Peter does, that they know personally or from the letters, if they're trying to make up John, then Jesus wouldn't say, "Get behind me, Satan." He wouldn't have denied Jesus 3 times. He wouldn't have finally been revealed in John as the disciple that lost his temper and cut off the ear of the high priest's servant when Jesus was being arrested, right? You would want to paint the best picture of Peter because you've already know what he's done for the church and how you want him to be viewed in the future.
And by the time that John is writing, Peter's already dead.
Yeah, which is why people believe is why John puts Peter specifically for cutting off the ear, and why it hadn't been mentioned earlier is because they didn't want that to be another thing for people to be like, you should arrest this guy that cut off someone's ear. And so before it was always a one of the disciples, and then at John we finally find out it's Peter, and it was believed because he's dead, so they can't do anything to him for cutting off the ear, so you might as well make it public. I just love it so much. Everyone should just read through all of John 14 this week. That's just going to be my recommendation, because there's so much that goes from that to Jesus promising the Holy Spirit, which is such a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
Such a big deal.
John 14, 15, 16, 17, it's
okay, well, recommend the whole book at that point.
Well, you still got time before Easter.
No,
but I'm excited. We're going to be spending a lot of time.
Holy Week. What do we have to look forward to?
Well,
the next
so Palm Sunday, we're going to be talking about the vine and the branches in chapter 15, and then Holy Thursday, we'll be talking about Jesus' arrest in the first half of chapter 18. A great line. One of the I ams that isn't linked to a metaphor is in there. And, when they come to arrest him, Jesus asks, "Who is it you want?" And they say, "Jesus of Nazareth." And he says, "I am." And they all fall to the ground, at the power of that statement. And so we'll be talking about that a little bit on Holy Thursday. And then we'll also read through in the second half of that service the Passion narrative from John, getting a sense of that. On Good Friday, we're going to talk a little bit about Jesus's conversation with Pilate when Pilate asks him, "So you're saying you're a king?" And he says, "Well, you say that I am." And so talking a little bit about how the world was looking for Jesus, or for the Messiah, for a king to be. And then on Easter Sunday, we will read about the story of the empty tomb, but we're actually going to flash back to John chapter 11, when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, and he says, "I am the resurrection and the life," and the way that foreshadowed what was going to happen on Easter Sunday.
That's amazing. So if you want to prepare your hearts and see what God has for you in his word, read those chapters ahead of time before service. Get it on your hearts, on your minds, and I think it'll just be much more fruitful as we come together and worship and see what God put on Pastor Scott's heart. Yeah, it's going to be a good Easter this year.
It is going to be a good Easter. It's always a good Easter.